Hello and welcome to another episode of Richard's Comics. Today we're going to talk about something a lot of people are familiar with, event exhaustion. Do you want to kind of explain that?
Yeah, so events are something that really you didn't have in comic books until, you had team-ups between characters.
Early 80s?
About early 80s, and it probably started with, would you say Crisis?
I would say Crisis. Yeah, we'll talk about Crisis first.
Crisis on Infinite Earths was where, by event we mean it's where all the characters in a certain company are in the same event. And so there's some massive level crisis, like, again, an example for people maybe not as familiar with comics, like Infinity War, the movie, where all the heroes have to be together. And that wasn't common. It was until Crisis, or it didn't happen until Crisis on Infinite Earths, which when the genesis of this was not only characters in DC, but characters from other universes in DC all coming together.
Timelines,
right.
Different realities, planets.
And at least at this time, it had company-wide consequences. People died in this. Worlds got changed. Characters got changed. And it was just like a big thing. And DC, people said DC was going to fail when they did this because it was too much to do. And this ended up being a huge hit. And so that's an event in comics. And so like anything else, when something's successful, you do it over and over again, which is where
they're in business to make money.
And so there were events after this. And of course, Marvel wanted to get in on the business. In the 80s did Secret Wars, which was their big event, which was hugely... These Crisis and Secret Wars are considered probably the two best events ever made, which go figure they were the first big ones that were done. Yeah,
I mean, Marvel had smaller ones like Contest of Champions, but really, this is really Secret Wars. At the same time, Marvel was also promoting their... they were doing a new action figure line. And so you'll notice a lot of these characters here, they actually had their own action figures. Now, DC at the time, Crisis... it was very complicated in DC. They had characters been around since the Golden Age, some in the 70s and the Silver Age, and they were really trying to simplify the canon. And so they took a lot of the redundant or characters and they got rid of them. But these events are really kind of the template, the standard that all their events are measured for both companies.
So these are the trades of these where they collect them all nowadays, remaster the color, because these are old issues. They put it, they've bound them. Of course, Alex Ross art on both of these.
Well, I think the other thing to mention, at that time, and they don't always do this with events as well, for Crisis, we had Marv Wolfman and George Perez coming off of their, actually I think it was still going on, their New Teen Titans run, which was extremely popular at the time. And so why Marvel had New Mutants, we had New Teen Titans for DC. And this was by far the most popular creative team in DC at the time. Do you want to talk about the Secret Wars?
Well, in Secret Wars, it's where the characters were all pulled to another planet to basically fight all the villains. Yeah. Because this cosmic being wanted to see who would win, and there were stakes. The fate of different things were at stake, and so it made all these characters didn't get along and interact with each other. And so there would be years between events back in the 80s and early 90s.
It was really a special thing.
Right. And so, but then it started accelerating as they thought, well, with this, you'd buy 12 issues, 9 issues of a series, and it was all self-contained. It wasn't in other books. You still had your monthly titles coming out. But then they got the idea of, hey, why don't we have it spill into all our comics? So now, if you don't like a certain type of comic, like say it's a comic you'd never read, because we tie it in, you'll buy it. And that was okay, right? I mean, I think in the 80s they kind of started doing that.
That was kind of an a la carte approach. You just take what you want. You don't have to get the whole thing every single time.
You see how it affects each corner. Even some characters maybe aren't in the event, but you don't have to buy the issue. The main stories in the 12 issues you're going to buy.
Yeah.
And so, but then people would buy those. They go, oh, we're making more money. That's so then it became, let's have an event every year. And so all of a sudden they just started accelerating. They didn't take the time to craft a story, and the story started suffering. Even though there were some good ones here and there, it was hit or miss. And then they started, I think the more recent phenomenon, they started spilling details of the story into one-shots and miniseries.
Absolutely. And
into the monthly issues. And now you got to buy 75 issues to get the full story.
Yeah, I want to say more modern events like Dark Knight's Death Metal. Infinity, which was a very bloated,
Marvel
half-delivering storyline that Marvel did about 8, 9, 10 years ago. Where it started with the premise where Thanos was the big bad guy, but oh my lord, did it go off on a tangent with the world builders and these different Avengers. You
had to buy 75 issues to get the full story because it spilled out. Yeah. And so then it would get so bad you'd come back to these 8 issues. In issue 4, they started up something they'd done in a miniseries they had moved the story on, and you're like, what?
Yeah, if you didn't get that miniseries, you don't know what happened.
And it's just we would say it's creative and there's more issues and we can make a bigger story now. It's just because they want to make money. I mean,
it really comes down to them wanting to sell you another $4 or $5 book.
You know, a good example was in the 90s, they had DC 1 Million, which was 6 issues, 7 issues, 8 issues.
I think the main series was about 4 issues, but the tie-ins were you could pick and choose as you wanted.
One shot for each character. That month, that's all they had was a DC 1 Million Green Lantern. DC... And they're actually pretty good, but you didn't have to read them to get the 4-issue story. That was probably one of the best modern examples of that actually working with spreading it out, where you didn't have to buy it all, but you could, and it actually did build on the story because they were able to focus on individual characters more. But that's the exception rather than the rule.
I mean, there's a few. I mean, we're not saying they're all bad. There's certain ones like King in Black that ran through Venom and Spider-Man. That was pretty well done. War of the Realms was not bad. But for every one of those you have Empire with Avengers. Which, did anyone actually read Empire? Because I don't know anyone who did. But so it's just came out and it's already obscure.
But hey, there's 65 issues you have to buy if you really want to read it.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to. When you go back to the old Secret Wars, when you go back to Crisis on Infinite Earths, you basically see that those were self-contained. Then as we move into the 80s and 90s, we start getting events like Maximum Carnage, Batman Nightfall, Reign of the Superman. Why great events. You didn't have to pick up every single tie-in to get the overall gist of the story. And then a lot of events now, Original Sin with Marvel, for example, really did not deliver on their promise of changing and nothing will ever be the same.
A lot of this is to pump issues. We have 12 issues of Squirrel Girl. No one wants to read it. But you know what? Out of 12 of them, because now we're having 4 events a year, which it feels like.
I think you're pretty close.
Out of 12 issues, 4 of them tie in. You got to buy them, so we're going to sell more Squirrel Girl. I mean, just don't make a Squirrel Girl comic.
Or for an obscure character that does have a fan base, make it a self-contained story like you used to do. If people want to read more about Squirrel Girl or Slapstick or Nightwatch,
they're horrible characters. No one wants to buy.
But regardless, leave it up to the consumer. Let the consumer decide if they want to get that. Give them the option. But for the people who are just there to get the main story, do you really, not to pick on Squirrel Girl, do you really care what Squirrel Girl is doing when the Avengers are fighting Ultron or Thanos? No. And so let's keep it. If they want to get it, let them get the Squirrel Girl miniseries or tie into whatever character. But for the most part, leave the main story in the event that you're already paying for.
Well, I think that, it sounds like we're just saying, well, things used to be better in the old days. And they were. But the bottom line
we're not jaded at all.
But bottom line is there are good every once in a while there's a great event. Cut back on them. Spend some time, make a good story, have an event maybe once every couple of years.
Make them special again.
Make it to where it has consequences, it changes things in that universe of the characters, and don't go back to where you have spill over into the issues, but you don't have to buy them. In other words, you're just seeing a corner of the fight. You don't have to get it to see the main fight. And that way, if you want to buy it, great. If you don't, you don't have to. And I think if they could get back to these events, I think it's event fatigue now. People are just sick of seeing them, and they don't sell like they used to. So their idea is, let's just do more. Well, that's the wrong way to do it. You need to do less and to get people to want to buy them again. So
I think another point to bring up on that is a lot of times what they do is they look back at Secret Wars. They look back at Crisis on Infinite Earths. And instead of coming up with a new idea, they go back and basically regurgitate a story that we already have seen.
Which is what's the most recent DC event?
Dark Crisis.
Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths. They might as well call it Dark Crisis with Metal on Infinite Earths, which would be mixing everything they've ever done. It's at some point you're just regurgitating, you're just rebooting, and it's just crap.
I mean, it basically looks like you're just trying to make money for money's sake versus putting out quality stories with characters that people love. And that's really what we want to see.
And it tells you everything you need to know with TV and film, is that the stories they're adapting are the stories from 30 years ago. They're not adapting last week's event.
We're not in a bubble, in our opinion. There's a reason they're milking this era of comics, because that's when we had originality. That's when we had top creative talent. That's when we were true to these characters as they originally envisioned by people like Stan Lee. And that's really what we want to see. We want to see growth. We want to see development. But at the same time, too, we want to be true to the cornerstones of these characters. I mean, really.
That's right.
That's what it comes down to.
And the events aren't as special now either, because you have every character's interacting with every other character. Used to, you never see Venom interact with the X-Men unless there was an event. Well, now it's, if we're going to sell a comic book, we just throw Wolverine in a Venom comic and vice versa. So that's not as special as it used to be anyway. These guys might as well are on a first-name basis at this point. So.
You might as well put everybody on the Avengers at this point.
Exactly. Well, they did.
Yeah, that's true. So, that's another
except
story.
Venom. Oh, wait. They did.
No, they did do Venom.
Carnage isn't yet, though. He's still a serial killer, so we can't have him on the Avengers yet.
So they had that Axis event where they kind of flipped him around and he was good for a while.
Let's not talk about Axis.
Not talk about Axis. But that's another good example. So I guess just to kind of sum this up, we're not saying no to events, but we want events to be what they used to be. Self-contained, pick what you want, kind of an a la carte approach. If you want to read more about Squirrel Girl, pick up her miniseries. For the 99% of people who don't read Squirrel Girl, we don't care. Just stick to the main event.
And you thought this was about events. This was really a quiet attack on Squirrel Girl.
Just kidding. We have no problems with Squirrel Girl. Just not really a fan of the character or the great.
Just don't have her in the next event.
But anyway, we appreciate your time today. Just let us know what you think. Do you agree with this? Do you not agree? Just let us know. Appreciate your time and have a good day.